2, 1. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. I am back.
How was
Everything is good.
Cancun?
I am back. I'm back in my apartment within the continental United States, and I am back into the Hearthstone mindset.
So what is the Hearthstone mindset?
I don't really know. Lots of RNG, lots of anger. I'm feeling pretty happy right now, but I'm feeling okay. For the time being. But you have been here. You have
So,
been
so this is what happens when you get away from Hearthstone for like a week, like an entire week with nothing Hearthstone related going on. You get
yeah.
happy, and you are less angry. That
No,
sounds
it's
about
well.
right.
I mean, this is also what happens when you apply copious amounts of bad food. By bad, I mean bad for you. Obviously, really
I was
tasty
about to
food.
say, I thought the food was great.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like all you can drink pina coladas or
Mm,
anything you want, really, and just lots of sun. It's pretty great, man. But
well,
that's not what we're here for. Or if that is, we've been doing this wrong. You have been here playing Hearthstone, and I actually haven't asked you yet. How was the week?
someone here needed to pick up the slack and get some 12-win runs. That's all
Well,
I'm saying.
I will say it's we seem to do this. We seem to alternate, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do seem to alternate through expansions. There have been times in which we've both been like on.
Yeah, but
Um,
usually it's like one of us gets like 3 in a row and the other person gets like 1. And then it goes like back and forth like that.
right, right. But last expansion, I think for like October, November, December, I got the majority of the 12s,
You,
and now
you got
you're
like all
getting
the 12s except like 1. I think I had one 12-win run on stream then. It was a pretty
right,
sad time.
right. And now the sad times are coming from me.
Yes, and I one upped you so hard because I played my first solo warrior run, like
And it went
of the
12,
expansion,
right?
and it went 12, and that's why we're talking about
Yeah.
card good bad. Let's kick it off with that. Actually, let's just
Ooh,
shake
okay,
things up.
okay,
Let's start with card good bad because I really want to talk about this.
okay. All right.
Not just because it went 12, but because the deck had 2 Reckless Flurries. And I had played with Reckless Flurry like once. It felt like it was okay. If you don't know, because you don't play Warrior and you don't see Warrior, and so you never know that this card is in the game, even though it actually is not only a weapon, but also has the expansion bonus. So it has all these offering rate bonuses, and we rated a 122. So presumably, it should be picked fairly frequently. It is an epic card, Reckless Flurry. And what it does is it has 2 charge. Um, it is not a weapon. It's a spell. This is how little I know about Warrior these days. I just know not to play it. So it is a spell, and it uses up your armor, which means you can armor on the same turn. But it's normally 3 mana, and it deals the damage of the armor that it uses up, and it uses up all your armor. So normally it's like 5 mana for a volcanic potion, right? Like if you're starting from nothing. And that's not very good, but like okay, right? You're a warrior. You'll take any volcanic potions, no matter how marked up it is. That's like the thing you notice about this card. So there's 2 parts of this card, right? So it's a 122. It's card good bad, right? So is it good? Is it bad? It's good. It's not like we're raising the score of the card. It's been a 122-ish since I don't know KSC came out, and we haven't touched it because we haven't played much with it. And it seemed like the 1 or 2 times I've touched it. I don't know how often you've touched it because you played
I
more warrior.
no, like once maybe.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. Yeah.
Okay, but I think generally people underpick it because it's such a weird card, and they're thinking like, "Oh, I'm not a armor warrior, right?" And like as if there were such a thing in the arena as an armor warrior. Like I don't have any of the synergies. Like I can't get like a 3 mana twisting nether, so why bother? But that's not how this card works. Armor synergies you can just gather up from one turn to the next, especially in
They're
this
very
meta.
plentiful now. Yeah.
Yeah. And not even like with a card. I just mean like hero power, right? Like this is the meta of like leaking mana, right? Of just like having mana you don't have anything to do with. And as a warrior, you really don't want to do that, but you're going to still end up just like hero powering at some point. And then if you are actually on the board, chances are the hero power is going to stay on. Like your opponent's not like hitting you to the face with nothing with no board, right? If you're clearing their board. So your use of weapons is usually your biggest use of armor. So if you don't use a weapon to hit anything, you can actually stack that armor. So you can do this like these like weird plays where like if you have a taunt, and warriors have a lot of taunts, or if you just have other minions and you think they're going to remove your minions rather than hit your face, you can like pre-armor up, like instead of equipping a weapon or something, and it'll just stay around for the next turn. And then you're doing 5 mana for a super hellfire, which is totally worth it. Or
Yeah.
it can go even higher, right? I've done this for like 8 damage to everything. Or if it gets high enough, you don't have to pay the extra 2 mana on that turn, right? You can use the 3 mana and then put out like something for the
In
board.
your example, is a super hellfire just a flame strike?
Like for both sides, yes. It's a double-sided flame strike.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna be like, okay, I kind of get, but yes, I understand. It could be yes. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So you have more armor than you think you do is my first point, because I know a lot of people think they like never have any armor unless they have a card that explicitly says give you armor. And those cards, you know, especially if they're like a minion or something, may not be good because you'd clear it. So that's the first part. The second part is, even though it is a double-sided board clear, oftentimes you use double-sided board clears not when you have absolutely nothing on the board, especially these smaller ones, but when you trade in what you have and then use a double-sided board clear. So like half the time I was using Reckless Flurry, I had stuff on the board, and it was totally fine. And the third thing to add to both of those points of why Reckless Flurry is better than you think is that your opponent will, not dumbly, I think intelligently, but they will definitely do this, totally play into everything. Because you're a warrior. One of your defining weaknesses is you have no ability to deal more than 1 damage to everything on the board. And even dealing 1 damage to the board, your opponent like doesn't really seem to care too much about it. Which is why like the weapon, what's it called, like the 4 mana weapon? The Blood Razor, which is why the Blood Razor gets any value at all, right? Like the Blood Razor, I still hate that weapon. But it basically requires your opponent to be stupid. And warriors have a lot of ways to ping stuff, so, but at the same time, its hero power doesn't ping stuff. Your opponent sets it up a lot. When it comes to like potentially dealing 4 damage to the entire board, for example, your opponent does not even think about it. Nor should they usually. Like, your opponent will just play into it. I have had Reckless Flurry kill like 4 or 5 things off my opponent's board, like half the time that I use this card. It is a crazy, crazy card. In a way that you'll very rarely see like Flame Strike get that kind of value. Why? Because no one in their right mind plays around doesn't play around Flame Strike anymore unless they're really desperate or they already have a read that you don't have a Flame Strike. But no one tries to go for a read first. No one tries to bait out your Reckless Flurries. They're just like, whoa, if he has a Reckless Flurry, I'm screwed. And so when you have Reckless Flurries, you just wait, and then your opponent gets screwed, and then you win the game.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's accurate. So I got a question for you, because whenever I've used it, and I might have used it more than once, maybe it's like twice or something. Part of the reason that afterwards I didn't like it so much was for a lot of my warriors, I was like, well, I kind of do need to be on the board,
yes,
right? And I have found when I played it as well, it was always awkward. Like on the turns in which I could use it, I didn't really want to use it because I would have to kind of give up the board, right? And then afterwards, it was like it never got me the sort of value that I needed to win if I even wanted to switch to value, you know? So I'm kind of curious how you used it to a winning effect and what kind of deck it was.
I think so. It was definitely not a pure aggro deck. Like it was, I'd say, more control of a warrior than a normal deck would be. Like partly because I had 2 Reckless Flurries and I got them pretty early on, but it was maybe like 4/2 drops, like 4/3 drops, 4/4 drops, that kind of thing. So like normally you want a more solid curve than that. This deck just didn't have it. We took every 2 we got, and it just wasn't enough. But it also didn't have a lot of weapons. I think we had like 3, and that was like a pretty good number. So the mithril, like a mithril spellstone. I forget exactly what else was in the deck, but it was a pretty like mid-rangey, like it wasn't very high value either. It was like a mid-rangey, maybe even late mid-range kind of deck. It's a deck that you would feel pretty comfortable with as a mage, right? Like usually not as a warrior. But I think that the meta just tilts so much in favor of like slow mid-range and control and away from like fast mid-range that even as a warrior, that like this is a pretty decent way to like play the game. And there was no Fool's Bane either, because Fool's Bane is the other way where you could play a little slow, right? You just like catch up with your Fool's Bane. This deck had no Fool's Bane. It had one Gorehound. And like one Fiery War Axe. It was not a very weapon heavy deck. The way the way this was working is I was actually on the board more often than not when I used Reckless Flurry.
Okay.
Like that's why I think I think you're hitting on a good point of why Reckless Flurry is awkward, because as the warrior you're typically on the board, you want to be on the board. If you're off the board, you can't, like, there's not enough warrior cards that deal damage with initiative, and to the extent that they exist, they're usually weapons, which means you can only use one of them per turn. So if you are not on the board, you have a lot of trouble dealing with what your opponent plays. But you can be on the board and still use this, especially if the things that you have on your board are either have a lot of health or have very little health. Because if it has very little health, then you don't care. You're throwing it into a thing anyway before you Reckless Flurry, right? Reckless Flurry is 3 mana. So if you are on the board, you can pre-hero power the turn before, because they're not going to remove your armor. Right, you can even pre-hero power maybe like if you hold the board for 3-4 turns, maybe you manage to hero power once or twice there. Not that you're looking to hero power necessarily, but sometimes you're just like, well, you don't want to overextend, right? You never want to overextend on the board, because your chances are you're not facing a warrior, you're facing some other class, and almost all the classes right now punishes overextension. So sometimes you want to go slower, and warrior doesn't have a lot of things to do when they want to go slower except the hero power, and the hero power is crap. So this kind of gives another use to being able to manage your aggression. And like I said, right, like if you have low health minions, you just want to throw them in anyway before you double-sided Flame Strike or play a Volcanic Potion for 3 mana. If you have a lot of high health minions and then your opponent plays a bunch of mid-sized minions, maybe you just don't care, right? Maybe you're like, well, this is 3 mana, I'm killing 4 minions. Yeah, I'll hurt my 2 minions on the board, right? Or like I'll kill one of my own minions off and then hurt something. It's still a really good deal. Like, you don't have to get I spend 3 mana and I play a Twisting Nether. Like, don't look for those, because that's not what the card is for. Or else the card will be 8 mana and in Warlock. Or it'll be 7 mana and in Priest. So, yeah, like, the main value from it really is that your opponent never, ever, ever, ever plays around it. And you can set up your armor and your opponent won't even be tipped off for it. Because it is epic, because no one seems to pick it, and because I'm sure everyone plays it wrong when they do pick it, right? It's a new card. There's never been any card like it before where you have to manage armor in that particular way. It definitely gets more value than I think it looks like it would.
Cool. All right. Interesting. Definitely going to check out that deck, that 12-1 warrior deck.
That'll be on YouTube next week on this Wednesday, like, so in a couple days.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, give it a shot. By the way, this is not me endorsing warrior as an okay class in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying Reckless Flurry was kind of fun and a pretty good card, and we've been rating it on 122 forever, and until now people have asked me about it. I've been like, wow, it seems like it'd be that good, and now I'm like, okay, it's official. I feel very comfortable with this 122 like rating. This is not just like we plug some things in the algorithm and they think it'll be like 122. This is like okay, we've also played with it. It is actually definitely like a significantly above average card if you're using it right and you don't have like a pure aggro class deck, which you shouldn't have anyway. Like a pure aggro, it really doesn't work in this meta. I have yet to get a pure aggro deck to go to like even 10 wins.
Yeah, I will say I haven't played much of like pure aggro. I've just been playing a lot of warrior, and it's like a lot of times I can't even draft aggro even if I wanted to, you know? So I don't end up with that. I just end up with a bad mid-range deck, and then I just lose horrendously.
That's most warrior decks are bad mid-range decks.
Right. And mid-range already gets beat by control, and bad mid-range gets beat by any other mid-range. And you're not mid-rangey enough to like really beat aggro. So I just lose. I just lose. Like against all the archetypes, I just lose.
Warrior's not in a good place right now. So I mean, the warrior flexibility is always like weapons can be card advantage and tempo, right? Or it could be reach. So you always want the ability to have it go reach. But in this meta, like Reach, especially Reach that can be blocked by a taunt, it just doesn't get you very far. So you're just like trying to use your weapons for as much card advantage as possible, which involves a lot of armoring up, unfortunately. But you are given the space to armor up a lot also, without being punished in this meta. So it's kind of a weird spot for the warrior. Definitely not ideal.
Yep.
Okay, so let's do deep fried meta. The deep fried meta for this week, I want to talk a little about drafting because we talk a lot about gameplay. We usually talk about gameplay. It's just more important than drafting. The cards you're offered is probably more important than gameplay, as long as you have like a basic sense of what to do. But your actual draft and what decisions you make does still matter, even in this meta. Which I feel like this is probably like Ungoro was probably the most draft important meta. MSG was a close second. So we've been in a draft matters a lot, not just the cards you're offered, but how to pick them place for a little bit. And then it's been easing off since then. Like KFT was less about how you drafted a deck and more about what cards you have. And now we're in KNC where it's really about what cards you're offered and really not about how you're making the draft. But still, I want to talk a little about how to use like the tier list, the Lightforge tier list. It's at thelightforge.com. We keep it updated. It's been in a pretty settled place since the very beginning of the month, since the new year. And there will be one more major update coming to it. I want to say sometime in February, hopefully. But otherwise, like for KNC, it's pretty settled. And in the major update, even there's only very few cards are going to move more than like 5 points. So I think we have a pretty good feel of where the meta is. Now, just because that's true doesn't mean you just go straight down the tier list, right? Like going straight down the tier list, even if you're trying to do that towards the later picks, at some point you're just like, well, this can't be right because the tier list doesn't know your deck. It'll give you your like 8th 3-drop, right, for no reason. So you have to adjust for that. And I think most people are pretty good at adjusting for like, oh, I need a drop, right? Like this deck needs 3 drops. All decks really need 3 drops. And I'm falling behind on it, so maybe prioritize 3 drops a little more than the other scores. That's pretty basic. Or like, oh, I'm only taking small cards. I maybe need a big card because it's not an aggro deck and I just have my curve. Right, like maybe on the 16th card, it's not as important to fill out my curve if most of my cards are already curve cards, and it's more important to like, I don't know, take that worm. I don't think those are very hard decisions to make, especially, and in this meta, a lot of it is just, it's purely based on the tier score, right? Like the removals are so important right now. Like if you get offered a decent removal, you just take it. It doesn't matter what other stuff is going on with your deck, really. So instead, we're going to talk about when it comes to drafting, and I think this is the major skill in drafting right now, is how much you want to lean into a synergy or an archetype. So if your deck... Yeah.
So what do you mean by lean in?
Okay.
I guess.
So normally, if you just go down the Lightforge tier list, you're going to end up with a mid-range deck, right? Like probably in this meta, it's going to be a slower mid-range deck. But still, it's a mid-range deck. Right, you're just not going to be offered enough like 2s for it to be a faster mid-range deck. It's probably going to be a slower mid-range deck, but you're fine. Now, when people start getting a few synergies in the beginning, like let's say I get a couple of beasts, right? I know that it's my 10th pick. I have like 6 beasts. That's a lot of beasts, even for a druid. I'm now going to prioritize beast triggers, like, you know, more often. And so that's called leaning in to the synergy. And this is kind of problematic because you have to know how much to lean in. Like, yeah, I get Menagerie Warden.
Menagerie Warden, yes.
Yeah, so Menagerie Warden's good when you have a lot of beasts, right? Like, we all know that. But how good is it? Is it better than a swipe? You know, like, is it better than a worm? We don't really know. Depends on how many beasts you have and what beasts they are, right? But the really experienced players will know how to answer that question at each stage of the draft. More inexperienced players or people who are just not like watching out for this when they're drafting may not like have as good of a sense. So we're gonna kind of dig in a little on the specifics of how to lean into a synergy. Same with the archetype, and I think the general idea is going to be try your best not to lean into archetypes, and for synergies, like watch out. But like this is definitely a meta where leaning into synergies is a very doable kind of thing. So archetypes would be like, my first 5 cards are 7 drops. I'm going to make a control deck now, right? That's like leaning into it. I'm going to caution you a little on that, but also explain some of the stuff. So let's start with synergies. Let's not worry about archetypes. Okay. First thing about synergies, drafting pace. The baseline that you need to know before you should consider deviating heavily from the tier list is you have to know the pace of your draft. You have 30 cards, and if you watch any of our drafts, when we come to a hard decision, we always say, how many beasts do we have? Oh, it's like 4 beasts on pick like 17. That means that you're expected to have X number of beasts if you just draft normally by value. So always know how many beasts you're expected to get, and then whether you're ahead of the curve or below the curve, right? Like
how can people find that out though?
You can't. Because no one will actually has that written anywhere, including us. Although we have it in the algorithm, we could really publish it. We probably should publish it, what the average is. And really what the average is just, if you follow our tier list, this is how many beasts you're going to end up with on average, right? Like, it's a very simple math thing. It changes every expansion. The offering odds make it different. Our number is going to be wrong because we don't use the micro adjust. And so micro adjust is going to screw everything up as usual, but it's not going to be that wrong. Right, like they're only micro adjusting a certain number of cards. So even though the micro adjusts aren't very micro, as we know, it's still a limited number of cards. Like if we say you're expected to have 7 beasts as hunter, you may be really expected to have 6 or 8, but you're not going to be expected to have like 10 or 4. But if you draft enough hunters, or if you like face enough hunters even, like you'll know how many beasts you generally see. Like be mindful of that. Like think about this stuff as you're playing. Like, keep track of what your opponent has, because what your opponent has is what the average people are drafting. And it's probably not that different from what you're drafting, because I think the vast majority of people right now use tier lists. Or they've internalized the scores from the tier list, and they don't use the tier list, but they're still drafting similarly.
Right.
Now, your pace is the pace of the deck, of the draft and how it's going, right? So if you're expecting to have 6 beasts by the end of the draft, you are on pick 10 and you have 4 beasts. You are very much ahead of the pace. At this point, you are supposed to lean in to beast-related stuff a little bit more. Or conversely, and this is actually more important, because the more beasts you have, leaning into beast-related stuff is a little easier to figure out than the reverse. This is the one that I think people mess up a lot. You have already a Menagerie Warden. It's in your deck. You are 6 picks in. How much more value does each beast have? Because obviously you need some beasts, or else your Menagerie Warden is going to be a crap card. And let's say you only have 1 beast right now. You're like just on pace. Like how much more do you want from it? And the answer is, the fewer number of beasts you have in your deck, like the more behind you are to the normal pace of beasts, the more important each additional beast is, and the more you want to reach for it.
Right. That makes sense, because if you're looking at sort of a percentage jump as well, right? Like going to 2 from 1 is huge. Going to 8 from 7 is like meh.
Like you literally double your chance to hit this going from 2 to 1.
Literally double.
Not quite literally, but almost double. As soon as I said literally, I'm like, no, I don't mean literally. But yeah, on the other hand, if you are like on pace for beasts, or like even ahead, if it's like pick 10 and you have 4 beasts and a Menagerie Warden, and you're like, hey, I have a really good beast deck, let me get more beasts. You don't really need more beasts. Like, are they good? Yes. Are they better than the tier list is indicating? Yes, because you have a Menagerie Magician, Menagerie Warden, and you're going to try to set up this whole, like, network synergy, right? Like, we talked about Jades and the network synergy back in the day, where
Sure.
now you have a whole bunch of beast stuff. You can take more beast stuff because you're getting more beast stuff, right? Like, it's all beast. Um, but you don't need to. Like, it's not actually raising the value by that much. If you have a Menagerie Warden already in your deck, and you only have 2 beasts, and it's pick number 26, the third beast is really freaking important. Because the Menagerie Warden needs to hit a synergy, or it's crap. On the other hand, if you have a Menagerie Warden, and you have 12 beasts, and it's pick 26, the extra beast really doesn't matter. Because you're gonna hit your beasts anyway. So that's part of the leaning in to take into account, where even if you have like a really good card that requires a synergy card to make it work, if you have enough synergy cards, it doesn't mean the more synergies the better by that much. It's almost like the other way, right? Like the less you have, the more you want to raise the value of these synergy cards.
Right.
And so in the same way, if you have like a bunch of beasts and you don't have a beast trigger yet, you don't have anything that uses beasts, and you're wondering what is the next beast worth, it's not worth a lot. It's actually worth very little. It's worth less than what we have on the tier list. Because you're already behind on beast triggers, because you've gotten 10 cards in and you haven't gotten a beast trigger, and you're ahead on beasts. So you're in the like bad situation, right? Where you have a lot of beast value, but you don't have any beast triggers. So adding more beast value is really like increasing the chance you're gonna like bust and end your deck with like 1 or 0 beast synergy.
Right. I think this is an important point to make because a lot of people, and I've seen this through like coaching sessions, they will just sort of stick with the same mindset that they go into the draft with. Like beasts are good, or like, oh, elementals are good, right? Or
Oh my god,
like
elementals. Yeah, this will lead into the next one.
yeah,
Anyway, keep going.
right. And then it'll be sort of no matter what. It's like, well, beasts are good, beast synergies are good, and this is a very important point. Like the value of beasts will be dependent on what pick you're at and sort of what cards you have, and also the triggers for the or the conditional cards, right? For beasts, they will change as well depending on how many beasts you drafted and everything. So both of these values change, but it's very easy to see people just go into draft and saying like, beasts are really good for druid. I'm going to always add some additional point into my internal system for beasts when I see one. And it could be like pick 28 as well, and maybe you have like one, like you have a Menagerie Magician, not even Menagerie Warden, right? And they'll be like, oh, it's a beast, we should, I'm gonna add my sort of like
5 points.
Yeah, 5 points, 10 points to this thing. When you should be thinking like, oh, well, those points are gone. Like that's sort of the vacuum additional points that you have before the draft, but it's a very different situation.
In fact, you should start taking points away, because what the Lightforge tier list does, and what I think every tier list should do, if it's not already doing, I'm pretty sure all the tier lists do this. They are incorporating your average deck. So once you've dropped below average, like I don't know how many beast triggers are in a druid deck, but let's say like 2, right? And you have like, well, obviously if you have 0, you need to deduct points. But let's say you have 1 and it's pick 30. Well, you need to deduct a bunch of points for the beasts, because the beasts have been raised based on the expectation that you have more beast triggers, and you don't. And this doesn't just work on number 30. If you're on pick 20 and you have 1 beast trigger, you're lowering the scores of beasts, because you've gotten most of your draft now, and you're behind your pace, right? Like we're talking about drafting pace. You're behind your pace for beast triggers, which means all the value of beasts should be going down. And especially if you also have already a ton of beasts to begin with, then it should go down even more, right? Like always know your pace for each individual like synergy conditions that you're drafting, how much you expect, and whether you're ahead or behind the game. And then adjust the scores based on that.
Yep.
So if you're thinking, this is really complicated, maybe I should go use Hearth Arena to do this. Hearth Arena doesn't do that. It does like half of that. Like what we just discussed, it does like half of that, which could be better than nothing, or it could be worse depending on if you actually needed to do the other half of that, and it's just pushing you more in the other direction. So it's definitely one of those things where you want to be able to like at least know what's going on anyway, even if you use another program as like a guide, right? Okay, so that's just the first part of drafting synergies. The second part is what I'm going to call the utility analysis, which is what happens when I hit this. Right? Like, how good is it when I hit this? If I'm looking to see if I'm adding a beast to my deck and how many points I'm going to raise it, I need to know what effects I'm getting from this if it does hit the trigger. So if I have a trigger that's like Mark of Yasharaj, the answer is I get an extra card. Right? If I hit it, I get an extra card. And what are my percent chances to hit it? Not just that I have to have the two cards in my hand at the same time, but that some percentage of times, like, one has to be played before the other, right? Like, you don't always just get to play the beast with the Mark of Asharaj because of mana considerations. Especially if you're talking about Menadre Warden, that you're definitely not going to play that with your beast. In fact, any large beast, you can't play it on the same turn even, right? And so then you have to figure out, well, what if that beast dies, right? You put a beast on the board, you're always risking that it's going to die. So if it dies, then you'd have no trigger anyway. So, again, like, your synergies are less helpful than you may think they are. And conversely, your synergies may be more helpful than you think they are. Like with an elemental, you have an almost guaranteed trigger. You just play it, and then the next turn, you can just plan out playing the triggered card. So you need much fewer elementals. And it becomes much like, so your elementals, let's say you get, I'm going to be wrong about this because it's some weird fraction, but let's say you get 2 points per elemental, like in mage, right? Like, let's just say that's your average that you get per elemental. Well, if you have like a high elemental deck, like it's pick 16, and you already have 3 elementals, well, then the next elemental is not only going to be worth a little bit less because you already have enough elementals, it's actually going to be worth much less because you can already set up whatever elemental stuff you need. You're already way ahead of pace. And this is like a very easily triggered synergy. So normal people, if they have like, let's say 1 Steam Surger and 3 other elementals, are like, we're an elemental deck, take more elementals. Oh my god, plus 10 points, 20 points to each elemental. But really you should be thinking, oh wait, we have enough elementals, minus 2 points for each elemental.
Right.
Like, you see how big of a difference that makes in people's heads.
Yeah. I think that's a big difference because people think like elementals synergize with each other. Elementals give, and only certain cards work off of that, right? It's not like Jade, which it's like every like
Jade is more to the better.
It's the perfect synergy, right? It's just have this, and there's no interactivity, and this is what people complain about, right? It's like there's no triggers, there's no conditions. You can't like stop people from jading, you know? So, but yeah, with other stuff, I think people just assume it's like, oh, there are synergies related to this. I need all of them.
Yep. And again, this is the stuff that, like, you know, a program like Earth Arena does not do. So, like, if you use it, like, be wary of that, right? Like, you have to subtract out the points yourself. They'll just add points. Like, they'll go and be like, oh, more elementals. Why? Because you have an elemental trigger. Look, you're like ahead of the pace. So this is like the one level further analysis to like blunt that a little. And more so, and this is becoming a really big deal when it comes to priest drafting, and priest is such a good class right now, is dragons, right? And also spellstones, like things that trigger your spellstones. Armor synergies for druid is a pretty big thing right now. Weapons for warriors is a little bit less of a big thing because you're just going to draft your weapons anyway. But it's kind of the same idea where this will, like, even more so than an elemental, this will literally always trigger. You just have to play one card with the other card in your hand and you're good. Always trigger. So you need actually fewer of it. And Spellstone's a little different because you can trigger up to twice, right? So it's not like, oh, if I have extra triggers, it doesn't do anything. It actually still does, potentially. potentially. It could have already been triggered and then it doesn't do anything, but it's better off than dragons. So again, even in a dragon deck, even when I'm trying to go for dragon synergies, there comes a point where I'm like, I don't really need another dragon. Like, not that badly, at least. Like, I'm not, like, adding points for this thing being a dragon, even though I have, like, 2 or 3 dragon triggers. Like, you may be thinking, oh, add all the dragons. All the dragons you could possibly get. But in reality, it's like, this dragon has some extra value because I have all these triggers. But because I also already have 5 dragons in the deck, I don't really need this other dragon. It's such an easily triggered synergy. Okay, so that's the utility analysis that you need to do also for your synergies when you're picking. Generally, this kind of, like, it sounds like we're just telling you to, like, ease up on the synergies a little, and that's true. I think many more people go overboard on synergies than go underboard.
Is underboard a word?
Overboard? Oh no, it's not. It makes no sense because overboard is like overboard a ship, right? Like
Right.
you're like jumping off. So underboard is like just like staying on the ship, maybe like centered on the ship, like staying nice and safe in the middle of the ship.
I don't know, but regardless, I don't think it's a word.
All right. So staying like safely on board, more people.
Okay.
Yeah. So you just have the people who don't notice the synergies, and then the people who are like, "Oh, here's a synergy, let's do stuff." But you really want to be the person in the middle, where you are mindful that you do have this synergy and you're accounting for it properly. Okay. And so the final thing, the third thing to know about synergies when drafting is that all synergy cards, or all cards with heavy synergy, and all cards that you plan on using as synergy that are not like dragons or elementals, or even elementals a little, and even dragons if you need to hold them, they're situational cards. So if you have like 2 dragons in your deck, and then you have like 3 dragon triggers, now all of a sudden your normal dragon that may be like what do you call it, hoarding drake,
What?
drake hoarder. It's the one with the 2 coins. Hoarding dragon? Hoarding dragon. Yeah. Okay. So you may have a hoarding dragon. You may think that's a normal 4-drop. I play it whenever. It doesn't do anything. But no. Your hoarding dragon is a situational card now because you have 3 things that need the dragon. So you're not going to want to play it. You're going to want to hold it in your hand even if you have the mana to burn and you want to play it. Or if you do play it, you have to be like, oh, this is not as much of a dragon because I can't just hold on to it. Like, it's a weird way to think about things. But having things that use your cards, your normally normal cards, as synergies makes your normally normal cards more situational. And on the other hand, something like a Menadre Warden, obviously, is always a situational card, right? Like, the heavy synergy cards are always situational cards. And I only bring this up not because situational cards are bad or whatever, but you have to be mindful when you're drafting that these cards, even though they look like they're minions and like drops and like whatever, they're not anymore. Their character changes when they come into your deck. You have to think about them differently because you don't want to get into a position, especially with these offering odds, where you have like 12 removals, and then on top of that, because I decided to make a synergy deck, I also have 8 more situational cards. So now 20 of my 30 cards are situational. Like, if 20 of your 30 cards are situational, you better have a really freaking useful hero power, right? Like, this is a problem that Shamans, which is the class we're going to play today, they run into a lot because they have micro-adjusted up all of their removals because they're a crappy class, and their removals are good. So Blizzard just adjusted up. They're real good. So Blizzard just adjusted up all their removals, which is fine, but it means that the class is going to have more removals than any other class. And it's going to have more situational cards than any other class to begin with.
Before I left, there was a deck that I played. I think it had like 4 Crushing Hands and 3 Hexes and a Lava Burst and 2 Lightning Storm. Like,
I'm pretty sure 4 Jade Claws for no reason.
I didn't have that, but today I was watching Ratsma's channel, and he faced a deck. Oh, this went into Double Fatigue, by the way. So we saw what was in the deck. It was double Lightning Storm, double Volcano, quintuple Jade Claws,
nice,
with a Jade Chieftain, and double. Did I say double Fire Alley? No, sorry.
Also double Fire Alley.
Yeah. He had all of that. Oh, plus like only one hex. Sorry, only
Uh,
and then only one hex after that. But yeah.
but like you see
So
how awkward of a deck that is to like play, and this is a trap that shamans fall into a lot because of what Blizzard's been doing with the micro adjusts. Um, and you have to be wary of it when you're drafting synergies, right? Because if you're in shaman and you're going to try to draft synergies, well, either your synergies are not going to work very well because you're going to play these cards as tempo cards because you need to like play stuff at some point, or you're going to have more situational cards and you're going to have to budget for these situational cards. Like, they're things. This is something that you need to think about, or else you get a much less good deck than you would have had if you just had like that insane supporting spells and just like some yetis and like 3/3s and like 5/5s, you know?
yeah. So this is always a problem with micro adjust. Like unless you have someone there sort of doing quality control and checking, uh, there's no guarantee that the good cards or bumping up the good cards will actually create the effect that you want.
Yep.
Like see Warrior, right?
Mm-hmm. Good cards don't completely make good decks. They make decks better, but they don't get the full job done if the gap is wide enough. And I think Shaman's on that line where like they did bump up all of it, and it did make Shaman like just good enough to be like on the same tier as other players, as other not players, as other decks. But you do have to still watch out, right? Like especially with a Shaman draft because of the micro adjust, but also with any other draft that you have that looks to be situational cards heavy already. Like any class can fall into this because the situational cards, like all your top cards are situational for every class almost. Right, because you can't like Blizzard is not gonna like print a card that's just good in all cases and really really good in all cases. Or
Yeah.
they may, but it's like usually a legendary or something. In the arena, you're going to draft very few of those cards. You're going to draft many more cards that are a little bit situational, but with a big payoff, right? And that's why it's really good. Like Hex is not good in every situation, but it's good in so many of the situations that you're okay with it being a little situational and still an insanely good card. But now, if your whole entire hand is that, and your opponent doesn't present you with that situation, well, now you just lost 6 mana, or however mana you had that turn, because you literally couldn't do anything. And again, this is not saying don't pick your hexes. This is saying here's a downside of taking synergy cards. So if your deck is looking like you don't have a lot of removals, you just have a lot of like solid, like, you know, normal minions, then yeah, lean heavier towards the synergies because you won't get this penalty. On the other hand, even if you're like a mage, right, and you have like 5 spells and it's pick 10, I don't know, maybe worry a little bit if you're debating between going with a synergy pick or going with like a regular normal minion. Because you don't want to get to the point where you're purely reactive. Not that purely reactive doesn't work, but again, we'll talk about this in leading into archetypes. You gotta like you have to actually have a deck for it. All right.
Yep.
So that's the synergies part. Any final words on how to manage your synergy picks? Not synergy picks. I don't want to trigger people. Your drafts that of cards that have synergy in the normal course of your draft.
Sure, there has to be a more elegant way to say that, but yeah, I think with synergies, it's just look. The important lesson or the takeaway point is just make sure you're consistently reevaluating your synergies as well. That's basically it, right? And for some of you out there, you're like, duh, I do it all the time. But I see a lot of people who don't do it, right? Who, they reevaluate sort of like their curve. And because I think this is very much in the public mindset now. Like, you can take any sort of arena player and then they'll be like, oh, well, I still need some twos, or, oh, I don't have enough big stuff. Like, that's easy to see. With synergies, it's hard to sort of do this on the fly, and then especially to take away points like we've talked about. So look, you don't need to know exactly the offering odds, and I would not go through the effort of like looking at it. It's like, oh, what are the latest micro adjustments to figure this stuff out? But it should be something that is in the back of your mind, and just always, so practically always stop, like take a breath, and then when you see a synergy pick presented to you, just look and see, it's like, well, am I kind of on track here, right? Like I remember that I'm supposed to get like X number of beasts. Well, I am like I'm halfway through and I actually have no beasts. Like that's bad. That's really bad. So like, what is the relative score of this now? Like just thinking of something like that will help you out, and it should sort of open and expand your mind and help you draft just smarter as well. So yeah, I think that's it. I think practically it's just keep on reevaluating, because I think a lot of people reevaluate lots of other things, but for some reason they just don't reevaluate synergies. They just see it as this like constant thing that they should prioritize or not prioritize.
Yeah.
People go the opposite way as well. They're like, I am never getting dragons. So it's like, no, no, no. And it just never happens.
And
right?
that used to work better. That's where we used to lean, but like we're in the flip meta now. Like you got to go with it sometime. You can't just have a totally vanilla deck. They don't win anymore.
No, it doesn't. This is why, like cards like Servant of Yogg Saron, that thing used to be,
Oh my god, that thing
like,
rose so much in value.
I know. Now it's like an
It's an
average-ish
average
card.
card, yeah. You're like, go for it. Do your thing.
You have to roll
Got
dice.
it.
You have to roll dice well. Like you can't you just can't win normally now,
This is why I don't even hate on shamans anymore. I used to be like, totems was the stupid mechanic with RNG. Now I'm just like, well, the rest of the game is basically shamans now anyway, so shamans are not that special anymore with its RNG. So yeah. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about archetypes. I don't want to spend too much time on the archetype part of it, but know that one, drafting pace still maintained. It's still the same amount of importance, just like synergies. You have to know the pace of your draft and how control or aggro it is. So for example, if in your first 4 picks you get 4 curve cards, you are not an aggro deck. Because later on you can just pick the other cards that are not your curve cards as you recognize you don't need curve anymore. Similarly, if you get like 4 non-curve cards, you're not a control deck. You can just pick curve cards later because you'll probably get them, right? Like, your pace is a little bit skewed towards control, but like very little. You have to know that at some point you need to fill out your curve, or you have to know that at some point you can stop taking curve cards and take basically like just like big bodies if you need to. And you will do that, and the draft will offer you these choices. So don't necessarily think you will always need to take the highest tier score card. And so, because I have 3 3-drops already, I have so many 3-drops, I'm going to have a great curve, I'm going to go curve. Like, you can, but anything more you do past that point is just you, right? We're talking about leaning into an archetype. Like, that means you are, like, putting a thumb on the scale and saying, this is a control deck. That's not where the deck is taking you. The deck's taking you, like, 1% control, like, more control than the average deck. And you're, like, plus 100% more control from here on out. We are pick 6. We are a control deck, right? I guess what I'm trying to get at is, like, even if it's not pick 6, even if it's like pick 26, maybe at like 26 it's fine, but even if it's like pick 21, it's not that hard to bring a deck back from like pretty control to like just slower mid-range. And in fact, most often the cards you're going to get offered is going to move you back towards the center by definition, because the center is what the average offering is going to give you. So no matter how far askew your deck is going towards, any particular direction of an archetype, the Blizzard drafting system in the arena is always trying to bring you back to the middle. If you go for value picks, it will always bring you back to the middle. So that force will always exist in your draft. And you can fight that force by putting the thumb on the scale. But you're going to end up with a lower quality deck in general. And that's more of a, like, I just want to play a control deck. Or like, oh, it looks like we're going pretty aggro. I never get to play an aggro deck. Let's just go aggro. The results are more often than not worse. So know your drafting pace, right? Like, if you're really off pace, like, if you're like 12 picks in and you don't have a single curve card, okay, you're probably not going to have a curve. Like, start building in that, start like picking stuff with higher health and attack, start picking more taunts, right? Like, lean into the control thing then, because your deck has spoken. But if you're just a couple of picks one way or the other, it's going to even out more often than not.
All right, sounds good. Hopefully, you guys have taken away some good
Oh,
info
I'm not
for
done. I'm not
draft.
done. Are you wrapping up already? I was just talking about there are 3 points to each of these: drafting
Oh my
pace,
gosh.
utility analysis, and then the situationalness. I just went over the drafting pace. Okay, so the second part of this archetype thing, just like for synergy, you have to analyze its utility, right? For synergies, we talked about whether it was an elemental or a dragon or how you use these particular synergies. For archetypes, you need to talk about how, like, why would you put a thumb on the scale to go one particular archetype over another? Why would you do that? Besides, like, I like playing this way, or like I'm better at playing this way, that's fine. But that's not like a maximizing win, like, and improving yourself kind of situation. If you're purely going for like how to make the best deck, there is no thumb on the scale. A more controlled deck is not a better deck. A more aggro deck is not a better deck. Now, mid-range is not. I'm not saying mid-range is the best deck, but I'm saying none of these are better or worse than the other. In a meta, if you go right down the tier list, you're going to end up with the center archetype of that meta. So you may think, or you may hear people say, oh, slower decks are better in this meta. Yes, but the tier list will always account for that. So the tier list, like the reason slower is better is because of the cards you're offering, and that's all in the algorithm into the tier list. So if you just draft down the tier list, you're going to get a slower than KFT deck. That's just what'll happen. So like, don't put a thumb on the scale like when you hear people say like control is good in this meta. All that means is all the decks are moving a little more control. The control you're going to get by putting a thumb on the scale is going to be worse than the mid-range you're going to get by just following wherever the hell your deck goes. So that's the utility analysis. It's almost never worth it to go farther towards an archetype than what you're being forced to go to, because the rest of the draft is always more likely than not going to bring you back towards the middle than push you farther along your way into your archetype. And so if you commit hard to an archetype on like pick 16, you're going to fail more often than you're going to succeed, compared to if you just like accept that there's a good chance this will still end up being a mid-range deck.
Right. So if I guess put it another way, if you are reaching early, you're still going to be reaching, like, because of the offering rates and everything. It's like if you're reaching super early, you're going to keep on reaching. Like on average, the game will force you to keep on reaching, because like you're not changing the odds, right? It's not a dynamic system in which Blizzard knows that you want this and throws you a bone,
Yeah.
right? It'll never throw you a bone. It'll just keep on giving you cards randomly generated, having to do with the offering rates and everything. So yeah, like, and then if you put together a 30 card deck and all, like 15 of those picks were sort of like reaches to get a certain archetype, well, you probably gave up a ton of value in order to do that.
Yep. And a final word about the situationalness of the archetypes. Sometimes you're going to get a fairly archetype deck, right? It'll just happen. Like, you lean the appropriate amount, be it like plus 15, plus 20%, and then it like gets there, and you're like, hey, I have a pretty solid archetype deck. But as you're going through the draft, what does that mean? And the more familiar you are with the archetypes and what they need, the more you'll be able to actually lean into the archetype at the correct, like, even if I should only lean in 20%, you need to know what cards to pick to actually lean in that 20%. And that is, it takes a lot of like feel for each archetype, but generally for a more control focused deck, you want survival and card advantage. Like, I see control decks all the time where they're like, I'm a control deck, and I'm like, okay, but your opponent's mid-range deck is going to have more cards than you, so you can keep controlling things and not dying, and then your opponent will have more cards than you, and you're not hitting them, so you're just going to lose. Right? Like, you do end up needing some kind of card advantage. Whether that be you just have a lot of bigger cards or some kind of card draw in there somewhere. Because you're not on the board, you can't get card advantage that way. So you better have a decent way of getting enough cards, as well as being able to survive. If your opponent puts down a minion and you remove it every single turn, you're fine. But that will almost never happen in the arena. So if your opponent puts down a minion and one gets through, you need to find a way to stop that. So you need taunts, you need heals, you need to be able to survive some chip damage as a control deck. So those are all very good. And on the other hand, on the tempo side, you may think, oh, I know what to do with tempo, just put more stuff on the board and more buffs. Sure, buffs are great and all to get some value. But just like buffs getting value on a tempo deck is kind of the same as like double-sided board clears getting some value on a control deck. It'll be a little bit more value, but it's not going to save your deck. What a tempo deck actually needs is, one, reach if it doesn't have card advantage. Like, you need to find a way to do something, right? Because the board's going to flip on you playing a tempo deck in this meta. And if that board flips on you and you can just repopulate and keep going because you have some kind of card draw engine, that's fine. If you don't, when the board flips on you, you need to put out all the rest of your cards, get as many of them to hit their face as possible, and then like top deck some reach, right? Like, and so you have to have that. Or you have to have anchor cards. Or, I mean, you should probably have anchor cards anyway. And what an anchor card just means if you are an aggro deck, you are really prone to being board cleared. So an anchor card is just a card with a lot of health. Or like a death rattle. Or it's something like Spirit Echo, which replenishes your hand after your board dies. Like, it's something that anchors your board so that your opponent can't destroy everything in one go without giving you a lot of stuff back in return. So those are the things that you need if you are going for an archetype, generally. And I know people know vaguely that these are important, but I think they focus on the wrong things. Like, these are the most important things for these two archetypes. And these are the two general ones, right? One's on the board, one's off the board.
Yep.
Okay, so that's it for me. I'm
done
talking about stuff.
Woo! Excellent.
I had stuff to talk about. I didn't want to like not talk about stuff.
That's fair. You said your thing. I thought it was a lot of good information. People can digest it and draft well. Good job all around to you and to everyone listening to this. If you made it this far, congratulations. You will not get a certificate, but you can make one for yourself for being wiser. Are we talking about Shaman now?
Do we have a question from the GOAT?
Oh, question from the GOAT. All right. So this one comes from our subreddit, the Grinning Goat subreddit. It was by Playing Sheriff, who just asked, what is the craziest RNG you have ever seen? And Playing Sheriff's example, I'm sure he was just a little bit salty after this, was the opponent played a Faldori Strider on turn 4. For those of you who don't know, it is a 4-mana 4/4 with Battle Cry.
Oh, did all 3 trigger the very next turn?
Yes.
Holy crap.
Triggered on turn 5. So basically
4 mana 16/16.
Yeah, 4 mana 16/16, which is coming in the next expansion, by the way, Overload 3. Basically Playing Sheriff is just asking, sort of, what's the craziest RNG you have seen?
It was 11-0 or 11-1, I forget which. Maybe 10-0 or 10-1. Either way, back-to-back opponents, it was a really good deck. We were doing really well. I was very happy with myself. And then on back-to-back decks, we faced Warlocks. And, we're doing okay. We're, like, stabilizing the board. We're, like, a little bit behind. We have, like, a little bit low health, but we're, stabilizing, and we think we can win it. And we get Pyroblasted. Warlock against the Warlock. Twice in a row.
I do remember this.
The first time, I was like, oh, come on, really? The second time, I was like, wait, what? Like, you can't even plan this, right? Like, you can, like, plan a bunch of snipers to, like, destroy someone, but you can't plan this. This is, like, just pure Blizzard RNG deciding to absolutely destroy our chances.
Right.
I think that may have ended up going 12 or 11. Either way, it's on YouTube. Somewhere.
We also got the double Dooms, like 2 Doomsayers in a row off of the Hungry End.
God, I remember that. That was when we were doing a co-op, right? Yeah. Our Hungry End gave a Doomsayer that we could not clear.
Right.
Twice in a row.
And there are many examples of, I don't know, like, I'm sure if we go back, there's lots of lots of stuff. But I think this question is also relevant because I see people complaining about this a lot now. Like this is something in which people say, man, just crazy stuff happens because people are drafting towards it, right? People are
Mm-hmm.
drafting towards it, and people are recognizing you just kind of need this to win. You can't if you just have the Boulder Fist Ogre Chillwind Yeti deck, you lose every single time
Yep.
because people will just have crazy swing cards now.
Yep. But keep in mind, we gave this whole big talk about don't lean too heavily into synergies, but lean somewhat into synergies, and like pretty high averages in the arena. Like this is not like a bad meta for me and for Merps minus his warrior. And we're not like, I don't know, I don't consider myself a heavy synergy drafter or anything. It's more like I think the low end has gotten significantly easier and the high end gets significantly harder in this kind of meta. Because the low end, like we're talking like 3 wins, 4 wins, 5 wins, they're filled with these like busted synergy decks. Because the reason you don't draft synergy as a good player is because it busts a lot, like just in the draft, and then you just have a crappy deck, right? You have a worse than just Yeti deck. You have a 4/4 instead of a 4/5 because the 4/4 has a synergy with something that you're trying to hit but you didn't hit, right? And on the other hand, once you get to like 10 wins, it's all these crazy decks for the most part. And you're like, my pretty good deck with some intelligent synergies is just not cutting it as frequently anymore.
Yep.
Okay, this question from the Go brought to you by our patrons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much for your support. Okay, let's finish this up with Shaman. What do you think about the Shaman right now? Because we're about to play
I
a
always
run.
suck with Shaman, but look, in a meta in which we are talking about value, right? Talking about value and also prioritizing removal. That's, removal is one thing that Shaman does probably just the best overall, right? Like they have
Mage
the most.
Shaman.
I like on average you'll get more, especially big removals with Shaman. Like with Mage, like before you could even say something like a Firelands portal, right? Was like a semi big removal. Like the size of a Firelands portal has gone down significantly.
Yeah.
Like it's still a good card, but that like 5 damage for 7 mana, like it used to be like the size of the average minion and also just the complexity of the average minion has like gone up as well. Like Violent Worms, for example, right? Even if you kill it, you're spawning lots of small things. So with Shaman, you have tons of removals. The only thing bad about it, once again, is sort of the balance, right? Like you want to have the good balance, and the problem I've still seen, I've been able to go like 7 wins, 9 wins, 10 wins with Shaman. The problem I always see is a lot of the premium cards are still 1-for-1 cards, and a lot of, let's contrast that with some of the like best priest cards in which they have like huge AoEs, which Shamans also have, but a lot of their cards are also just like big 2-for-1 cards.
Yep.
Like Free from Amber is almost always a 2-for-1 as long as they don't have like that huge removal, right? Mind Control is obviously a 2-for-1.
Or a 4-for-1 if
Or
you mind controlled their Free from Amber target.
Oh, shoot. I know. So yeah, like in terms of getting value, Priest is still like the best at doing that. Plus, they have a hero power that's actually applicable for value, right? But Shamans, the one thing that they do specialize in and their biggest strength, which I think, they are number one in just overall power of removals. Like mages have good removal, warlocks have good removal, priests have like good removal, but shamans, between all of their options, spells, weapons, and the fact that it's being boosted right now
Buffs
by
even.
oh yeah, buffs as well. Like, and the fact that a lot of their good cards are being, micro adjusted up. They do really well with that. But once again, I think the thing that's holding them back from being like a tier one, like a solid tier one class, is just what else you got, right? Past the
Mm,
premium removals.
I think Shaman's there. I put all the classes on the same tier right now except Warrior. Like it's gotten to the
Really?
yeah.
Okay.
I don't buy this whole like Priest is so good thing. Like I've seen my share of busted Priest decks that don't do anything. Um and I mean with the Shaman, because it's an RNG class, you really have to lean into the RNG. Like I've given up the like idea that I can have a curve and some Yetis and then some really good removals and win. You can't. Even if you have these great removals from the Shaman, like like Merps said, right? You go 1 for 1 and then you end up with not enough cards, right? Like that's just what happens. That's the weakness of Shaman. You have these great removals, but you have nothing that will give you extra cards, right? Your card draw is what Manatee Totem. Like you don't have the like Shaman just isn't built for that. On the other hand, this is like such a easy-going meta in terms of tempo that Shamans can get away with hero powering on turn 2, which was always a problem because there's no 2-drops, right? Shamans still have no 2-drops. You can't draft too many 2-drops as Shaman because 1, they won't let you, and 2, then you really don't have enough cards.
Yeah, yeah.
If like even your good cards are 1 for 1. Like you don't want that many 2-drops when your opponents don't have it. But now you can get away with hero powering a lot, and hero powers are really good for the Shaman if you can get a lot of them, because your opponent has to actually remove all of them, which means short of a board clear, it's really tough for them to remove all of them. If this is a meta in which there's a whole bunch of like big things running around, well, those big things have to keep hitting your totems, or you're going to keep generating all of the totems. And once as the Shaman you can generate all of the totems, then you're set. Then you always have a spell damage totem. Then whenever you get the board, everything heals. Then you can taunt. So your opponent can't even hit you to the face. So they have to clear your totems. Like, the totems are so good right now in this meta. Like, I cannot emphasize this enough. The, like, number of turns in which you just want to, like, totem as if it actually is a thing is so high now. Whereas before, totems were like almost like a warrior hero power, right? Like, you just really did not want to do it. Like you kind of roll for it, if you have to. Now it's like, yeah, just throw more totems on there. The KFT buffs are still here. Like, you may be able to buff one of the totems at some point. Or even if you don't, your opponent has to get rid of them somehow. It'll be very good defense. Yeah, so in terms of drafting, like definitely be wary that you're going to get too situational, maybe. And also, you need to worry like a lot about card advantage. But the way to win as a Shaman is still on the board. Like, you need to end up on the board to win as the Shaman. And in order to do that, the best tool the Shaman has right now is Crushing Hand. I was going to say Crush, and I was like, no, that's a different card. Crushing Hand. Because you need to Crushing Hand something. Your opponent will always play Big Minion at some point. Always. They have to. It's this meta. And you will always have a Crushing Hand because it has like such insane offering bonuses. You Crushing Hand, you put stuff on the board, and then you let your healing totem do its work, you let your buffs do their work, you win on the board. All the other stuff you have, the lightning storms, the volcanoes, like the Crushing Hands or whatever, that's all to support your swing turn and to keep you alive until your swing turn before you get on the board. And for the Shaman, you don't need a lot of stuff to be on the board, because even when you're off the board, you probably have a couple of totems out. Like, totems are things now. So getting on the board just means like a Yeti, a 2-drop, and like 2 totems. That's like on the board now. Especially when you have this whole entire handful of removals, right? I like to consider, tempo-wise, all removals in my hand that has initiative, I just subtract out their mana cost, and that's the extra tempo that I have already on the board. Because they're the tempo that I can use anytime I want. So if I have a lightning bolt, for example, I have 1 extra tempo on the board right now, every single turn. Because on any turn, I could deal 3 damage with 2 mana. And so the Shaman, more than any other class, does not need to actually have a lot of stuff on the board to like be on the board and to take advantage of everything. It's definitely a very interesting and different class to play than it used to be, and than any other class. And it's much less straightforward than like a mage, for example, or a priest.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's Class Talk Shaman. This is the Lightforge. Any last words, Merps, about drafting, about Shamans?
That's basically it.
All right. So
Uh,
now we're all master drafters when it comes to synergies and archetypes, and we've got all guide shamans to 12 wins.
all right, sounds good. Good luck in the draft, guys.
All right. Well, let's show them how it's done. We'll get a 12-win shaman after this on the arena coop. Until next week. Next week is what, Super Bowl week?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So are we doing Lightforge on Friday night then?
I think we are.
Okay, Lightforge on Friday night then instead of next Sunday. We're switching Lightforge and Coops up now to Friday night so often. The week after that's going to be Friday night too because I'll be gone that Sunday. So it'll be the next two Lightforges will be live on Friday night and it'll come up sometime on Saturday. Okay, great. So until then, see you guys. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Bye.
Cool, cool.